I'm very happy to welcome you. This is our 494th meeting in our 111th year. And as you know, as members of the club, the Economic Club of New York is probably the nation's foremost nonpartisan platform for discussions of social, economic, and geopolitical issues. We've had more than 1,000 guests appear before the club, and we have quite an exciting conversation that will follow in a few minutes. But I wanted to recognize some of the 272 members of the Centennial Society who are seated in front of the room, and you provide the sustained financial support for the club, and I want to thank you for that steadfast support. And we're also joined today by some members of our 2008 Economic Club Fellow Class, and that is a new program that we developed to introduce the club to next generation thought leaders. And the applications are open for the 2019 Fellows Program. So if you would like to sponsor a fellow for this program next year, I invite you to consult our website and to send in applications. I'm really happy today to introduce our guest speaker, Margaret Keane, who's the President and Chief Executive Officer of Synchrony, which is one of the nation's premier consumer financial services company. She has had quite an illustrious career. Margaret was first spent 16 years at Citigroup and subsequently joined GE. And after an 18-year career with GE Capital Management, she led the retail card platform as president and CEO beginning in 2004. She then expanded her responsibilities in 2011 to become president and CEO of their North American retail finance business. And of course, when the new company, Synchrony, which didn't have that name at the time, was launched, she led the company's successful initial public offering, the IPO, in July 2014, and split off from GE in November 2015. Margaret has been recognized as one of American Banker's top 25 most powerful women in finance for 11 consecutive years. She's one of Fortune's most powerful women. She's been so on that list for the last 3 years. And Fortune also named Margaret their Business Person of the Year on their Business Person of the Year list in 2016. She serves on the board of Allstate Corporation and the Financial Services Roundtable Board of Directors. But she's also dedicated to community service, and she serves on the National Board of Directors of Bill Don, on the Board of Directors of St. John's University, and the National Multiple Sclerosis Society Connecticut chapter, and she's a member of the Board of Overseers and a member of the Patient Care Committee at Memorial Sloan Kettering, where I'm happy to serve with Margaret. She's president of the Synchrony Foundation that funds Synchrony's citizenship platform, Families That Work. She earned her bachelor's degree and an MBA from St. John's University. So our format today will be a conversation that we're fortunate to share with Jason Kelly, who will lead the interview. And Jason is the New York Bureau Chief of Bloomberg and co-host of Bloomberg Business Week. I want to remind everyone that the conversation is on the record and there is press at the back of the room, and invite Jason and Margaret to join us to discuss Synchrony and financial services in the US and the world.
And much more.
And much more.
Thank you so much, Marie-José. What a delightful treat to be here with you.
Thank you.
All right, this room is gorgeous.
It is beautiful.
It's a nice day in
Very
Manhattan,
historic,
so let's have a chat.
Yeah, sounds good.
I want to take you back, if we could, start at the beginning. You grew up not far from here. Mm-hmm. One of a big family, son of a police officer, I believe, and the path that was prescribed to you was law enforcement. And you said, no. Why?
I think I was sick of it. I kind of still am sick of it. If you watch that show, Blue Bloods, that's my family right there. Everything about it, the dinners that they have, the way people are connected. It started with my grandfather, my father, all my brothers, cousins, nephews. We're fourth generation NYPD. I think it's
fourth generation.
Yeah, fourth generation. And I was saying to you that on Saturday night I was at a family event of a nephew who's graduating from St. John's in May, and they were all asking which test he took to become a policeman again. So I was like, really, can we just let him decide himself? So it is a cultural thing, and I think for me, I just had different aspirations. I wanted to explore the world. I wanted to get outside of my narrow universe of what my family was. I love them all to death.
Right.
And they are doing great work because we need people to do what they do.
Right. And so you go to St. John's, and did you know what you wanted to study when you got there, or you just wanted the college experience, college education, and then see where it led you?
Well, it was kind of a lot of default things, I would say. When I told my parents I was going to college, they told me good luck, because there was no money to help. And my dad got sick very quickly after that, so a lot of financial challenges. I worked 3 jobs while I was going there undergraduate. 3 part-time jobs, and one of those part-time jobs was actually Citibank.
Right.
And I worked so many hours as a part-time person, I was actually a full-time employee by their surprise. And I ended up just connecting with someone there who actually convinced me to come and join their management trainee program. And that's how it happened. And honestly, it came down to making money.
Right.
Because
your job, one of the jobs I know you had was literally like calling delinquent credit card.
That was my first job at Citi.
Right.
And this person who was there was going for his PhD at Columbia at the time. And he asked me to help him out on his project, like part-time, while I was working the other part-time jobs. So I guess there was 4 part-time jobs. But anyway, he was a really smart guy. He's one of the guys who developed a lot of the models that we used in the credit card business in the future. So I was in on the early days with him, and he's the one who really kind of mentored me, said you should go into the program. I went into the program and decided to go to graduate school at night.
Right. And so, and I have to think, I'm skipping forward a little bit, but I have to think that initial experience, because you probably didn't imagine that you would essentially be in that same business so many years on, necessarily, right?
No, absolutely not. I never thought of it that way. I never sat one day and said, oh, I want to be the CEO of a financial services company.
You're like, this credit card thing is kind of interesting.
Yeah,
I wish people paid their bills,
exactly.
but
But I think that one thing that I believe about myself, because of the things I went through, I think I have a real sensitivity to consumer and consumer needs.
Right.
And when we were going through the crisis, as an example, before things got really hairy, I started asking my collection team to give me phone calls. And I started listening to phone calls myself.
Wow.
And this was before this was in 2007. We started getting a sense things were not what they were, because the crisis really kicked in 2008. Mm-hmm. But 2007, I started listening to calls, and as a former collector, I was like, uh-oh, we are in trouble.
So what do you hear?
Desperation.
Okay.
It was a different kind of desperation. Mm-hmm. It was, contractors who would say things like, I've never been late on my credit card, but I have to pay the mortgage. And as I started listening to those things, I was very attuned to the fact that we better hire a lot of collectors.
Yeah.
And we did. We hired collectors way before a lot of institutions did. And it was really just, I think, my intuitive experience of experiencing collections and understanding there's a different tone in people's voice when it's really bad.
Right. And so so this wasn't just reading transcripts, this was actually listening to people's voice.
Yeah. I tell everyone in my business, if you really want to know what's going on with the customer and the consumer and our partners, listen, go to the operation, sit there, listen to our employees who are in the front lines, and they will tell you exactly what's happening.
Because that business ultimately, I know, and we're going to talk about technology and a lot of other things as we go on, but ultimately, that business hasn't radically, I mean, the collection business, how much has that changed since you were doing it?
Oh, it's changed a lot, actually. When I started.
But there's still people essentially calling.
No, it's still all of that, but
Yeah.
I think back when I started, you can call people pretty much all the time and multiple times and different times of the night. There's a lot of rules now about how you call.
Rules, those
yes,
pesky
there's a lot of
rules.
rules now. But yeah, essentially, it's still having that compassion for understanding what the situation is, and trying to help customers come out of that situation, I think is still something that's very important for institutions to continue to think about. And,
Right.
you know, I would say generally speaking, most people don't start their day off by saying, I'm not going to pay my bills, right? Something happens. It's, I lost my job. I hate to say it, in our country, a lot of it's medical costs.
Yeah.
People are stuck with less hours or whatever it is. That is very rarely that it's someone who just, ran out and ran up their credit cards. I mean, you have that, but that's the rare case. It's usually something's happened.
Well, and I mean, there is this statistic that I will inevitably botch about how small the cushion is for so many Americans in terms of an unforeseen bill of some sort.
$400,
Right,
they say.
for the $400.
$400.
Yeah.
Which is nothing.
Right, right.
So you just, I think as a financial institution, you just need to be aware and sensitive to those kind of things.
So you get into the training program. I'm going to stick with the chronology for a minute and then we'll go wider. But you go into this training program, and what do you see as the possible career path at that point?
Well, it was interesting because it's something that still bothers me, actually. I went to St. John's, and most of the people I was in the program with went to Ivy League schools. So, and I didn't go away to school. I commuted to my school because I had all those jobs, right?
Yeah.
And so I always felt a little behind what I was around because I didn't have that, degree that other people had. Yeah, I didn't have it. People would talk about going to Europe. I hadn't even been to Europe yet. I didn't even have a passport. So that whole, trying to fit into that environment and being successful, I think one of my traits is I just felt like I had to work even harder than anybody else. Mm-hmm. Just hard. So I just jumped in full speed ahead.
And what was in that program, what was the gender breakdown?
Oh, there was very few women.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very few.
So would it have been possible for you to get into that program had you not had essentially this,
mentor?
Right.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think if they just, were hiring, I don't think they were recruiting heavily from St. John's University, right?
Right. Or from the collections department.
Right, or from the collections department in Queens.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So you get your MBA at night, and at that point, you're kind of
Moving.
Yeah.
And
part of the deal, I would imagine, is then you're going back to city, and then it sort of moves along from there. I mean, we're sort of compressing here.
Yeah. I was at City for 16 years
Right.
and had a pretty big job there, and I was working. I mean, this is a good example where I think, being a woman in a senior role, I was very young. I was taking on so much. I was working. I would get to the office at 6 a.m. This is when they're in Long Island City, 6 a.m, and the parking lot would close at 10 at night, and that's when I would leave the office. And I had young children at the time, and I just was working for someone that wasn't the greatest person, and I just said, I got to get out of here. And it was a shocking thing that I quit there. People were shocked.
Because what was your job when you quit?
I was running operations for the retail bank in New York.
Right.
And I was one of the few women that were pretty senior there, and I think I was well liked there and thought of. And I came in one day and said, I'm leaving, and they were like, what? And they tried to get me to stay. And then I was going to GE. For someone from New York, going to Connecticut was like a foreign country. All the way up in Danbury, they had animals in the parking lot. I was like, if we see things move in New York, we look the other way, make sure it's not a rat. We don't want to look at it.
Yeah.
But we had all kinds of things in the parking lot. It was like there were Red Sox fans up there. It was really scary.
Right, yeah. Were you a Mets fan growing up?
I was a Mets fan growing up, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So how did GE find you, or how did you find them?
Well, it was during the days of Jack Welch when he was doing kind of the whole big Six Sigma push, which I really had no experience in at all, by the way. I got recruited by a headhunter. I went up there and I interviewed with someone who, in my opinion, is the reason I'm sitting here today, a gentleman by the name of Mike Neal, who was the president of GE Capital at the time. And I told him, I know nothing about Six Sigma, but you should hire me for all the other things I know.
Right.
And they hired me. And I went from running this very big operation to a very small business inside of GE Capital in Danbury, Connecticut. Kind of made my way through the company. And at that point, Six Sigma was the thing. Like you were getting, like I think I got started in April, I was in front of presenting to Jack Welch in June. Like that's how big Six Sigma was. They had all the leaders come in and, I think through that initiative, I got noticed and, kind of worked my way up through the company.
So when you first got there, obviously it sounds like there was a sense of relief for you that you were out of this situation that you didn't really like. You get there, did you immediately think, okay, this is the place for me?
No,
okay.
not at all.
Really?
I was horrified. I was like, oh my God, I don't know if I like this. It was just so different. The culture at GE, well, I think I was explaining, it's a very, people come out of the program at 21, they marry each other in the class, they grow up, they live in the same community, they only hang with each other. It's kind of like the police force in some ways, like they hang out with their precinct.
You're like, I've seen this movie before.
Yes, I know what it's like.
Yeah.
And I felt so much like an outsider initially. That it took me a while to settle in there. It did, because I was like, and then I was moving my family, and it was.
Because you were coming in at a pretty senior level.
Yeah, senior level. And it was, and it's not a company that was known for like accepting people.
Lateral,
accepting people from the outside.
But was Six Sigma sort of the kind of evening element?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I came in knowing that, and
Right.
it was in GE Capital who really had rejected the whole Six Sigma thing. They really didn't want to do it. They thought it was not like their thing. So I was able to work my way through that culture of like, okay, it's going to be okay. We're going to make it painless. Let me show you how we do it.
Right.
And I got noticed that way.
Right. So then you're inside GE, and obviously it's a, shall we say, exciting time over the course of everything that happens during that period. And then the decision is made that this business is going to be spun out,
Right.
but it's not so simple. It's not.
No, it was very complicated.
And so how'd you get tapped for that?
Well, it's a funny story. So the former CFO of GE, I was at a meeting down in Kiwa on a deal. It was like a board thing too at the same time. And the CFO of GE, we had the meeting, and he's on the other side of the room, and he goes, "Hey, Margaret, did anybody tell you, we're going to IPO your business?" And that's how I found out, like literally, like he was the president.
Shouting across the room.
Yeah,
like by the way,
we were in a room like this, and he's like,
Yeah.
"Hey, did anybody tell you?" I'm like, "No, they haven't." I went back to my room, and I waited till like the cocktail reception, and my boss at the time said, "Oh, I heard you're in the know." This is what he says. It's going to be great. That was my finding out. I was like, I'm starting to look up IPOs. How does it work?
Right.
What does it mean?
So you'd never taken anything public at that point.
No.
And so what was so then do you have to then go tell your team this is what's happening? So how did that go from
So I
there?
called my CFO right away, and I said, hey, this is what's happening. This was in April of 2013.
Okay.
And obviously at the beginning we had to figure this all out, and a big part of the challenge was because we were part of GE Capital, and the Fed had already joined GE at that time, or GE Capital, we had to get regulatory approval. And it was during a period where, the regulators were still like trying to figure out what this all meant. And so the first thing we had to do was an application. And they didn't even have an application. So we had to create the application. And we gave them a kind of trial run application. And then they came back with a bunch of comments and said, here's all the things you need to do. And they put very stringent requirements on us. They required that we had no connection to GE at all by the time we split off. Right. Which are things like, 4,200 vendor contracts where GE or GE Capital were in the name. We had to rewrite them all. And by the way, when you're GE and negotiating with companies like Oracle and IBM, a lot easier than when you're Synchrony Financial, I'll tell you that.
Spell that again?
We had to renegotiate, I think it was 4,200 contracts, plus all our leases and all our buildings, as an example. Another example is GE still had GE appliances at the time, and we financed their appliances online. We weren't allowed to do that. I had to call the CEO up of appliances and say, sorry, can't finance your appliances anymore. Can't have anything to do with you. We had our salespeople had GE fleet cars. We had to get out of those. I mean, it was like, and then all the systems, they didn't want any system connections. So we had to create our own data centers, bring in our own teams. We had, at that point, we had to build out our capital team, our tax team, things that we relied on the company for that we didn't have. So building all of that out while getting reviewed by the Fed. They were doing due diligence on us the whole time to see if we were standalone ready.
Right.
So the pressure was enormous. And then I had to build my board.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, because to me, for anyone sitting in this room who's ever been in a position where they've had to report to a board, which ultimately I guess everybody does, certainly at a senior level, not many people get to pick a board from scratch for a company of this magnitude.
Right.
How does that work?
Well, it's probably the part of the job that I least probably understood. I mean, I had presented to the G board, so I've been in front of a board for sure. But, this whole how do you build a culture and how do you make sure your board's going to fit within that culture? And one of the things that I felt pretty strongly about is I really wanted to make sure my board was diverse from all aspects. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things we did was really just create a matrix around. There were some requirements you have to have, right? Audit, risk, those types of things, kind of compensation. But then what? Because
you're not just building a board; you're building a public company board,
right? So we looked at both diversity, and then we looked at what are the skill sets we really want to bring in. Mm-hmm. And so, we went out, and so for instance, I have a very diverse board across in terms of both skills and diversity in general. But for instance, we wanted to get someone who really knew about brand and consumer. So we hired Laurel Ritchie, who came out of Ogilvy, because we said, look, we're going to be a new company. How do we create our brand? How do we create our name? All of that. So, and she's very involved with us in terms of how we continue to morph. One of the other big areas is just cybersecurity. So we hired someone who had a tremendous amount of cybersecurity experience. We looked at kind of this, where's the future of technology going? And we hired someone by the name of Will Graylin, who had created what eventually became Samsung Pay. And now he's actually out of Samsung and starting some other new companies. So we were looking for breadth of, okay, how do we make sure we're moving forward and developing the skills that we needed as a company, but having people on our board we could tap into to really leverage their experience.
So let's talk about culture a level down, and maybe even all the way down, because you are in this position where you get to create a new company, but kind of, and there's a period in which you're still very much attached financially, culturally, even though you're kind of easing yourself out, as you described. But what do you do to say, okay, we got to take the good stuff from GE, but also create something different, distinct?
Yeah. And this is interesting because we actually, there's this period between July of 2014 and November of 2015 where we had a foot in each place, right? We had 3 independent directors. We had 5 GE board directors because GE still owned 85% of us. I still got my salary from GE. They gave me my last raise in 2015. But at the same time, we had to think about who we wanted to be. So one of the things I did in September of 2014, when we had like laundry list of things we had to get done, I took my senior leadership team away for a week, and we worked with the Purpose Institute to really talk about who we wanted to be. And I will tell you, my team was rejecting this, like totally. They were like, what are we doing? Like, we have so much to do. I'm like, look, we got to figure out who we want to be. And how do we create a culture that we all feel good about? And, we spent a couple of days together. We came up with our purpose statement, our values. We then validated that with employees. We went all the way down to the very bottom of our organization to test our values of who we wanted to kind of be. And I think, I think the culture of our company is one of the things I'm most proud of. I think we have a culture that is innovative. People want to win. It's a culture where anyone in my company could be who they want to be. And I think this was something I felt extraordinarily strong about. We have all the diversity networks that everyone would have. We added a couple coming out of GE that I felt were important. And I think it's...
Added a couple diversity
networks.
Yes,
so one that I'm particularly proud of is People with Disabilities Network. And we have probably close to 300 people who work in our company who have disabilities. And I think, you know, it sounds great to hire people with disabilities, but you got to change the culture.
Yeah.
You have to have an environment where people can feel comfortable coming to work. You have to have the, you know, besides the physical stuff that you have to have, it's, do I feel comfortable coming and being different?
Yeah.
Right? So, and I think the reason that's important is because our business, we deal with consumers, right? We have 76 million card active customers, right? And they come from all walks of life. And so the more we can create this open environment of being very open to what people are about, it helps us be a better company.
Right. And so was there any sort of rejection from people who had come over from GE? It was like, oh, this is not the GE way. This is some newfangled way that you've come up with, and I kind of like.
You know, there wasn't. It's kind of interesting because we've since hired other people out of GE to come in our company, and they all talk about the culture.
Yeah.
The thing I would say about the culture is, what people we hired from other banks, because we've hired about 50% of our exempt population is from the outside, 50% of GE. The 50% that come from the outside, if I sit and talk to them, what they will say is, you know, I went on the interview, I was like, oh, these are really nice people, but, you know, it's the interview, this isn't how they're really going to be. And then they come in and they're like, wow, this place is really what it's all about. And I think it is what we pride ourselves on. And I think, you know, for me, I love underdog stories. I love people who make it from nowhere. I love the story of, you know, people coming from our call centers and getting into exempt roles. We do a lot. We have a lot of diversity in our call centers. I came out of a call center.
Yeah.
I tell everyone my story. Somebody saw something in me and took a chance. How many people in our call centers who are diverse should we be taking chances on? I have a program called STEP, where we put people through a 2-year rotational program. 70% of them come out as a non-exempt to an exempt role. They're internal people. And, you know, that's part of the culture. It's like we try to give people opportunities across all spectrums of the company.
Right. And so was there any point in that period where you were kind of coming out where you thought, this isn't going to work? Or what was the biggest obstacle you felt like you had to overcome?
Well, you know, I was very hard on myself, I think. I kind of would drive to work saying, how did this happen? I'm serious. I'd be like, how did I get into this role? Like, I wasn't really prepared for that. I've never been a public CEO. And it was interesting. I met with someone from McKinsey who's pretty senior, and I was explaining my concerns of like, you know, I've not done this before. And he said to me, Margaret, most people who become CEOs haven't done it before either. Right. And I was just like, oh, yeah, that's true. So I kind of like turned my head around a little bit. But the most sobering thought for me of being a CEO was driving to do my first earnings, you know, and I drove myself, and I always joke about this. I'm like, what if something happened in the car when I'm driving? But anyway, I drove myself to the office that day, got in early, and as I'm driving, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, all these people are depending on me. And I thought about my employees, and I thought about their reliance now on me as the CEO in a very different way.
Yeah. And
it was very sobering, actually. And I thought about all the families that are tied to Synchrony and what is our stock price going to do. And, you know, I think about that all the time, not just the shareholders, but actually the people who work at the company.
Right.
And it's a sobering thought when you're feeling that kind of responsibility.
Right. And has it gotten easier?
No.
Okay.
No. It's hard. It's hard to be us. You're always, nothing's ever perfect, right?
Right.
So you have to insulate yourself in some way and just believe that you're doing the right things, because you could get very short-sighted if you're just looking at the stock price every day.
Yeah.
You really have to play ball for the long term.
Yeah.
And you have to have that confidence to make those decisions to play for the long term.
So from a management culture perspective, obviously GE is famous for that, development, et cetera. What do you take from that culture that you implement at Synchrony at this point? Whether it's succession planning, whether it's like any of those things.
I'd say there are a couple of really great things. Succession planning for sure, because we started from the day I brought my HR leader into the company, we started succession planning that day. Because it's unique in that we have this is just unique. We have a number of people who were with GE and within the 5-year or 8-year window of retiring. So we, day one, started working on succession planning. Not only for my team, but actually the board as well. So we have been working on succession planning for the board because I think, you want to think 2 or 3 CEOs out who could do the job, right? So we've been working on, and that's something I think GE was really, really, really good at.
I'm imagining your board members like flipping through their board pack and be like, oh, board succession.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes. And then the other is, training and development, I think. I think the discipline of delivering on results is another big one. So I think we took all those good things. I think what we probably didn't take is I do think the inclusive culture part is probably a broader experience in our company than maybe it would have been at GE.
All right, so let's go all the way back to where you started in the sense of back then you had a very direct personal window into the consumer. Now, and you gave us the number, how many people, what an amazing view into consumer sentiment. How is the consumer feeling right now in October 2018?
Yeah, I think if you look at the general metrics, the consumer's good, right? Unemployment's low, people are working, jobs are good. I do think there is a bit of a have and have not in the economy. And I think the people who are on the edge are there's more of them, I think. I think there's less ability for them to get themselves out of some, things have been cut off from them in many cases. So if you went back pre-crisis, you just had a lot of more availability of credit, for instance. And I think there's less of that. Home equity has been tightened, a lot of things like that. So I do think there's this have and have not that I think we all, not only me as a financial CEO, I think all of us need to be concerned about in terms of the have and have nots in the economy.
And so how does that play out in your business?
Oh, it's, someone calling up and asking how much is my open to buy on my credit card.
Yeah.
Right? Because it means they're trying to get to the next, the next paycheck or their next whatever, right? So I think you just have to be thoughtful. I think, look, we have a responsibility. We lend to the spectrum of America. And we have a responsibility to make sure we're doing that in a thoughtful way and not putting credit in the hands of people who are going to get themselves in trouble. Now, we don't have all that insight, and sometimes, and I think one unique thing happening now, there's a lot of credit getting done outside the system that there's not clarity on. There's a lot of fintechs, there's a lot of startups doing different things, and it's sometimes hard to see what is really out there in terms of the consumer themselves. So I just think we have to all continue to maintain discipline around how we're lending.
And what are the tools that you might be using from a technological perspective that maybe didn't exist last time around, financial crisis? What are you using that maybe gives you unique insights?
I think probably the biggest thing is really the use of, I would say, AI and data in the sense of machine learning. So I think where we're getting better and smarter, probably the biggest area is fraud, right? So using machine learning and models to help us identify fraud, that's a big problem. How we authenticate customers is a big opportunity. More and more of the point of sale, remember, the uniqueness of my business is you apply and purchase right away.
Right.
So we got to really make sure we know it's you, it's your phone, it's your mobile device, your iPad. So I think we've worked with fintechs that we're partnering with, as well as some of our own internal stuff, to really just get really better at that. And that, I think, just keeps the consumer safe, and it makes sure we're lending to who we should be lending to.
And is it a mix of buy and build for you?
Mix of buy and build.
Okay.
We are doing a lot internally. We have a ton of data, as you can imagine. Part of the uniqueness of the company was our ability to build out that infrastructure out of the gate to get us ready for that. So we have, a big data lake, and we can leverage data across our platforms. But then we're working with third parties as well. We're working with a company, for instance, Payphone, who, one of the interesting things is everyone keeps their phone up to date, and they have a lot of, ability to make sure that that phone actually really does belong to you.
Yeah.
And they can let us know that. So those are the kinds of things that make it safer.
So does the credit card as we know it exist 10 years from now?
No, I don't think so. I think none of us are going to carry plastic.
Yeah.
It'll be.
How soon will that happen?
I think it's going to happen sooner. I'm surprised it hasn't happened even sooner.
Yeah.
But I think some of it is the infrastructure of the environment has to shift. But you would hope that, I don't know, 5 to 8 years from now, you won't have plastic on you.
It'll just be on
think
your
your phone will become the center of a phone or another device. It could be another device.
Right.
But I don't think we'll be carrying plastic and swiping plastic.
And how much do you hear back from your customers and maybe from your partners around, given all the data that we're talking about, given the access and everything, about privacy? And what are those discussions like? And where's the pain point and the worry point there?
Well, look, I think number one, we have to all ensure we have the right procedures and processes to protect consumer data. I think, as a financial institution, as we use different forms of data, we're required by the regulators, if we turn someone down, to explain why you got turned down.
Right.
I think the positive of the data is we could probably approve people we might not have approved before because we have different information. But I think the bigger opportunity is around how we service you and how we authenticate you. So I think the safety part on the front end, but then even on the back end, do you prefer to get a text message versus a phone call? Do you prefer talking to someone? We let you talk to someone. So as we get more personalized, and and particularly this next generation of folks coming up the ranks here, none of them are calling 800 numbers, I can tell you that for sure. And we have to be ready for that in terms of how they want to interact with us. And, can we be more personalized? So I like to use this example where, our dream is sometime in the future, we know that you like the cashmere sweaters at Banana Republic.
I do. Thank
Right,
you.
see?
Thank you
And
for
there you
knowing
go.
that. I appreciate that.
And then we could tell you
It's a little creepy that you know that, but that's fine.
Well, we can say we know you like them because you bought them before. We can say they just got new colors in. By the way, you have $50 rewards on your Banana card. Come on in.
This is getting eerie, but go on.
But this is where I think we're going to go. And I think when you think of digital natives,
people like it. I mean,
people like it. That was my point.
Yeah.
There are some, and you have to have the ability to opt out of that stuff. If
Right.
you don't want it, I get it. But I think as you get into the digital natives, they love that. They love that you know who they are.
Right.
And they love that you're sending them things to think about.
Right. All right, so let's talk about the retail experience, because I feel like we talk about this almost every day, especially around earnings season. Retail apocalypse, death of the malls, et cetera, et cetera. We spent, I feel like, the first part of the year talking about retail apocalypse, and then the summer and into the fall saying, maybe this retail apocalypse isn't all that it was cracked up to be.
Yeah.
You see all of this through your partners especially. Where are we in that mix of online and
So I
real life?
would say the following. I think, first of all, people like to shop. I'm just going to say. And most things we buy in store. We do. And I think there's been a lot of hype around that online is everything. Now, with that said, we're definitely seeing a big shift in terms of how people shop. So people, and I use the example of we sell a lot of furniture. People are doing a lot more searching online before they even go to look at the couch. They literally have something in their mind when they get to the physical store. They'll start seeking out, I saw this couch, show me this, blah, blah, blah. They'll probably buy the couch in store, but they may come home and buy the lamps online. And so our job is really to make sure we're integrated at all those points of customer research and making sure that they know they have credit available to them, there's a promotion going on, they can get something for a discount, whatever it is. I think that what we're seeing is we were over-retailed in the United States. And I think we're seeing a bit of a cleanse happening. I think the formats of stores will change. They're not going to be these big box
Right.
retail stores. But one of the things we're seeing now, and the research shows that the digital natives like malls. It's actually coming out. It's like malls are fashionable again. They like.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's the social aspect of it. I think it's the social aspect, and then we have to tap into that social aspect of that consumer when they are in the mall, and making sure we're tapping. And then I think the other piece is there are some really good retailers out there that are strong.
Right.
And I think we have to just, for us, we need to be part of this digital transformation and the data transformation. We have to be in the forefront of all of that. We have to be investing in all that technology so we can meet you wherever you want to shop. And I think if you think of our business, it generated back, believe it or not, the business was started in about 1932, the financing of appliances from GE. So back in the day, during the Depression, people would go in and pay weekly to get their refrigerator. And GE came up with the idea, why don't we finance the appliances? And in some ways, that really hasn't changed, because as people do big projects in their house, they'd like to get, 12 months promo and, do all those things. So I just think how they do it is going to be different, and we just need to be in the forefront of that.
So what's the thing that you're going to see, just as we wrap up, what's the thing that you're going to see through your data, through your customers, that gets you worried, that sort of, you went back to that moment in 2007 where you were listening to the calls and you were hearing that sort of thing. Is that what you hear, or is it going to be presented by new technology and AI that makes you start to redeploy your resources?
I think I'm an old school person. I think it's going to be many of the things we've looked at in the past. I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know if it's going to be the consumer falls over or we have some global event. Something will happen, and I think we just need to be prepared for that. I think what helps us, though, is as we get smarter using technology, I think we could be connecting with those customers maybe sooner in the process before. I think the goal should always be, can we get to them before they tip over?
Right.
Do we see signs of something happening?
Do we see something before they even see it?
Yes. That's where I think the data and the information will become, I think, more powerful.
And have you seen any shifts in kind of how and where people spend their money in the last 5 to 10 years? I mean, we hear so much about, millennials sort of bucketed. They love experiences and less stuff. And I just wonder, the rest of us can sort of prattle on about it. Like, you actually see where people spend money.
I'd say, definitely true that younger millennials are into experiences. They're the ones taking picture of their foods and doing all that kind of stuff.
I saw Marie Jose. She was Instagramming her lunch.
But I think what's interesting is the older millennials are acting just like everybody else acted.
Right.
They're buying houses. They're buying actual furniture and putting it in the house. They're having kids. Everything's just shifted to a little later.
Yeah.
But I do think there's this period in between before they get to the point where they're married and buying houses, that they are much more into experiences and want to be able to talk about those things.
Right. What's the thing that makes you the most optimistic about your business? I mean, you are now, I guess, theoretically almost officially,
3 years.
Exactly 3 years in. Biggest surprise, 3 years in?
The biggest surprise, I think the biggest surprise is what we accomplished in those 3 years. I mean, if you think about where we came from and what we had to do to set ourselves as a standalone company, creating a culture, creating a brand, being thought of as innovative, investing in technology. I think the thing that's most exciting for me is the ability to really decide how we're spending our money and where we're investing for our partners. And I don't think retail's dead. I think it's shifting and changing, and it's exciting. It's really, if you think about it, you could sit and wake up every morning saying, "Oh my God, right? The world's ending." I view it as there's so much opportunity for us, so much opportunity for us to really help our partners continue to be successful. And I think we focus a lot on the big retail guys. We have 180,000 small retailers in America who actually service a lot of customers in local areas, the Main Street kind of person, who employ a lot of people. And I think it's exciting to bring tools to those kind of retailers that maybe don't have access because they don't have big teams. So what are the things we can do to keep retail and businesses and small businesses and retailers and jewelry chains that, maybe it's the jeweler down the street, right? And how do we help them, taking our big opportunity and give it to them to really help them be successful? And I think that's an exciting place to be.
Good. Thank you so much for spending some time.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, both Jason and Margaret. Margaret, it's just so inspiring and impressive to hear a CEO who really has the pulse not only on the customer but also on the employees. And your point about culture that, Peter Drucker told us years ago, culture trumps strategy every time, and boy, you're living it, and that's really inspiring. And thank you, Jason, for leading this conversation. I just want to remind everyone that we have a busy month of November ahead. We have Mike Corbat, the CEO of Citigroup, who will be joining us next week. We have the NBA Commissioner the following week, and of course Jay Powell to conclude the month. So I hope as many of you as possible will be joining us for those November events before our closing dinner of the season, December 5th, where we'll have Hank Paulson and Tim Geithner commenting on the 10th anniversary of the 2008 financial crisis. So enjoy lunch and hope to see you soon and often.